All right, in this lesson, we'll take a look at a program called Interactive Ruby, which also goes by the name IRB, and it is automatically installed with Ruby. What IRB functions as is a sandbox or a playground. So you can think of it as a place where you can go ahead and practice or review your Ruby code without any kind of consequences or anything that could possibly happen. Basically, whenever we save our work in a Ruby file, that work is saved in a IRB environment. Nothing is preserved, nothing is kept. You basically simply open it to try out something like a brand new operation, try out a brand new method, explore a different type of object in Ruby, and once you close IRB, all your work is gone. So it truly is a playground for you to explore. How can you access IRB? Well, you can open either your terminal on a Mac machine or your command prompt on a Windows. Here I'm working on a Mac and I have my terminal open. And from anywhere within the computer, you should be able to simply type in IRB. And when you execute with enter, that's going to launch the IRB prompt. You can see here on the left we have our version of Ruby written. Your version may be different. Next, to the right of that, I have the current number of the line that I'm writing. So this is basically just a numeric count of all the code I put in here. And basically within IRB, we can simply write completely valid Ruby code, whatever we'd like. For example, we could do something like a basic mathematical operation. We haven't dived into all of the arithmetic operators yet in Ruby, but just from basic mathematics, you may recall that the plus sign is used to add. And within IRB, we can do something like this. We can try 3 plus 2, and we execute here with the enter, and we're going to get back the result. You can see here we have this little thing that looks like a rocket, and then we're getting back 5. This is called the output or the return value. This is what the program is returning to us when we execute this code. Now, IRB is what's known as a REPL. REPL is an acronym that stands for Read, Evaluate, Print, Loop. In fact, Ruby was one of the first languages in the world to have a feature like this called a REPL. And if you take a second to think about what those words mean, they basically describe how a program like this works. The first R in REPL is read. So the program reads your code. The E is evaluate. So the program then evaluates whatever code you've given it, whatever input you've given it. The next part is P, which is print. The program basically prints your work out for you. And then L is loop, which in programming terms means simply repeating a process or starting it over from the beginning. So REPL is short for read, evaluate, print, loop, which is sort of the methodology of how you use a program like this. You use it to read code, evaluate it, print it, and then repeat the process over and over again in a loop. This is really the perfect environment for something like basic, testing of Ruby, trying out something new, trying out a new method, seeing how something works. There's nothing wrong with making errors in here because this isn't a real-life program. This isn't a final project that you're working on. This is just a temporary place where all of your work will be gone as soon as you leave. Let's take a look at a couple other examples here. We can do something like subtraction here as well. We can do 10 minus 2. We're going to get back 8. And again, Ruby is simply going to give us back the result here. One thing that we've explored so far, of course, is the puts method or the putS method, which outputs text to the screen. Puts is totally valid here as well. We can do something like puts hello from IRB in double quotes. We're going to get something interesting here. Right below, you can see we're properly going to print hello from IRB, just like we saw in the Atom text editor and whenever we ran a Ruby file from the terminal. But below, next to this rocket symbol, we're going to get a nil. Now, this is going to be a little bit confusing, and we'll dive into this concept actually a little bit later in the course. But basically what this means is that the put statement itself doesn't actually return anything back to us. Nil represents nothingness. So what this means is whenever we have something like a mathematical operation, for example, what we saw just here, we are giving Ruby an input, 10 minus 2, and we're getting back an output, which is 8. Whenever we give Ruby an input of a puts, it's not actually returning anything back to us. What it is doing is printing, but printing is not some kind of mathematical operation that gives us back something. Rather, it's more of a static thing. It's an output that doesn't actually give us anything back. So that's why we're seeing nil here. I know it may be confusing, but we'll dive into this in much greater detail later in the course. The other great thing about the IRB REPL is that it functions very similarly to the terminal or the command prompt in Windows in the sense that you can use your arrow keys to navigate back to some of the commands that you've already written. So for example, if I use my up arrow key, I can go back to my previous command, press it again to go back to the one before that. Here's my first one. At this point, I can press down to get back to my second one, and it's all automatically typed out, so I can go ahead and press enter. And there you can see we get the exact same result. So it saves all of your commands, and those commands are kept until you leave the program. Speaking of leaving the program, how do you do that? Well, there's two ways to do it, two different words you can use. To leave the program, you can either type quit. So I'm going to type quit here instead of a Ruby command and execute, and you can see we come back to our prompt. I'm going to go back into IRB by typing IRB again, and now instead of quit, another word, basically a synonym, is exit. Exit is also going to bring us back out into the terminal or the command prompt. So quit and exit are basically synonymous. They function the exact same way. And again, as soon as you leave IRB, all of the work that you've had in that section is gone. This is not meant to be the place where you write a project. This is meant to be a testing place. This is meant to be a playground or a sandbox. Finally, one last thing to conclude this lesson, don't confuse IRB with Ruby. For example, many times people go to the command line and they'll type something like this. They'll type something like Ruby and execute when they really meant IRB. And at this point, when they execute without providing Ruby an actual file to evaluate or read, it's going to seem like it's stuck on this, infinite prompt. Basically, Ruby doesn't know what to expect. It doesn't know that it's that you meant IRB, and it's going to be stuck. Basically, it's running Ruby, but it's not really running a file. It's lost in this, chaotic, ether. Basically, whenever you make this mistake, all you have to do is leave and return back to the terminal or the command prompt. To do that, you can press Control-C. So Control-C on a Windows or on a Mac computer is going to bring you back. So again, if I accidentally type Ruby instead of IRB, we go to this, pausing status where it seems like nothing is happening and we can't type any characters in. Well, actually we can, but if we try to execute, nothing happens. If you ever get to that point, just press Control-C, and that'll lead you back to the prompt. In fact, for many different programs, Control-C or something like Control-D tends to be the way to basically force exit or force quit that program. So remember, IRB instead of Ruby, IRB, which is short for Interactive Ruby, just a fun place for you to play around with code. If there ever comes a point in the course where we do something in a file and you want to just practice it without any kind of consequences, if you don't want to replace what you have in the file, what you can do is always open up a fresh IRB session and just try out your code here. Any valid line of Ruby code is going to work within IRB, just like it does whenever we run it in a valid Ruby file. So utilize this resource as much as you can to debug, to practice, and to learn. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.